I wonder about the path ahead. You've got various economists warning that the RBA is not going to cut rates this year, that the last mile of inflation is harder to walk for Australia. Do you agree with that view?
Thanks, Lizzie. Look, not necessarily, no. We don't agree with that view. We think that inflation is probably going to continue to disappoint, undershoot the RBA's projections, and that's especially as the demand side of the economy weakens by a lot more than the RBA might be expecting, and the supply side responds. So we did have some other news today that is more of a draft form on the inflation front, but it's really helpful for some of those lingering inflation pressures within the economy that the RBA has been worried about, and that is electricity prices. They're proposed to fall by up to 10% next year after a couple of years of very strong rises and being part of the inflation problem. So this sort of whipsawing is one that's more regulatory, but as we see the demand side of the economy coming through and being a lot softer, those struggling consumers that Governor Bullock just mentioned then, and earlier in the week we saw in a panel discussion the new chief economist of the RBA, Sarah Hunter, also mentioning how consumers were very much struggling. Once that feeds through to the demand to businesses, then their ability to pass through some of those cost pressures becomes quite challenged in our view, and could see inflation recede a little bit faster, leaving the RBA much better positioned, and also perhaps a little bit vulnerable from a growth perspective in policy over the next couple of months. We see that shift coming more towards the middle of the year.
They'd waited 17 years. Why couldn't they just wait a little longer for that April economic report to hike rates?
Well, I guess they had the data they needed. You're absolutely right. Most people, when I was here on January 23rd, when they decided to hold, everyone pointed to April would be the most logical time. By that time, of course, the spring wage negotiations would have been fully completed and also digested. And also you would have gotten that quarterly economic report that comes out next month. And that just seemed like the right time. However, those wage negotiations ended up with much higher wage gains for corporate Japan than most expected. In the first round on the Rengo on Friday, essentially put wage gains of 5.28%, much higher than the previous year of 3.8%, and much higher than the consensus estimate of around 4.1%. So obviously, Governor Ueda and the other 8 members on the board of the Bank of Japan felt they had the data, that this is a virtuous cycle of inflation backed by wage gains. That being said, one of the key lines in the statement is that they will maintain an accommodative policy stance, and no indication of there's going to be necessarily further tightening. At least they're not telegraphing that right now. So perhaps it's one and done. We'll have to see going forward.